let's talk about the Queen Cosmetics Multichrome eyeshadows as well as the Esom Artistry palette. It is kind of an interesting pairing, but I've been meaning to try these mattes and I thought I would pair them with some of the multichromes in here. First, start with the details of the Queen Cosmetics multichromes. They have 10 shades total. They have 5 iridescent multichromes and then 5 black-based multichromes. And they've designed the cutest heart-shaped little compacts. There's a silver and a pink. They do come separately, and I will get into that in a little bit. And to open it, you just slide the cover off, and there it is, and it stays attached, which is really nice. And then you just kind of click it back and it closes. These are plastic, but they do feel really sturdy. So these are $10 each, and then each of the shadows is $17 each. In total, you're spending $27 if you want the compact as well, which is definitely on the more expensive side. So I feel like this is more of like a little bit of a novelty if you really just wanted to get one special shadow and put it in here and you could travel with it, and it's like a cute little compact. But if you were to have a bunch of these, they would definitely be a little bit harder to store. So you could just buy a couple of the shades and put them in an empty palette. This empty palette is from Cosmetics. I will link it down in the description box. And I was sent these in PR, and I do have an affiliate code with Queen Cosmetics. I absolutely love their lip glosses. They also have had one eyeshadow palette, so single shadows is something new that they're dipping into. So $17 is kind of like a standard pricing for multichromes at this point, and a code will bring it down a couple of dollars. And they also do run sales pretty frequently, I would say, up to 20% off, so it's definitely worth waiting for a 20% off coupon with these. As for the Esom palette, I did purchase this one myself, and it's really nice because it just kind of slides out like this, and you can completely take it off if you just want this. And there are shade names on the back, but they're kind of hard to see, so you'd have to like pull this out. So there's just like a lot of pulling out because this brand is aimed for makeup artists. I was very intrigued to try their formula, as this is one of the first products that they launched that is Esom branded, because they do carry Vizier. So I was just really curious to try it. So I'm going to be showing you comparison swatches and then 2 looks using the Esom palette as well as some of the single eyeshadows, and then I'll give you some of my thoughts at the end of the video. So let's get right into it. First look, I'm going to be dipping into this column. First, I'm just going to do a wash of the light peachy shade. I did wipe off my previous eye look, so if things are looking a little dry, that's because of that. So I'm just essentially kind of setting the eyeshadow primer, which I use the Pat McGrath, and then I'm dipping into this center shade, and I'm just going to put that right into the crease. Blending so nicely. I'm so glad I'm finally trying this palette. I saw that they launched a more colorful version of it, and I was like, hold on, let me try this one before I potentially buy the other one. But part of me kind of wants to hold off for a sale anyway. But that looks super nice. Taking the burnt orange on the bottom, just adding a little bit more on the outer corner, And I'm just going to bring it in a little bit into my crease as well, just add a little bit more depth. So far, these are definitely more buildable, so I'm not like overwhelmed with the pigment when I first go on, but it's for sure building really nicely. I do think just so far from first impressions, it feels different from Viseart for sure, because theirs is very, very pigmented and very kind of, I don't know how else to explain it, but kind of like thick almost, like you get a lot of pigment and a lot of product down, versus this seems to be much more just a little bit on the sheer side. And then I'm going to dip into this shade here just to deepen it up a little bit more, because I just cannot myself. So I'm just going to pop that right here. Yeah, it's definitely kind of like a building type of formula. I don't know why it keeps focusing on the other eye. How rude. So I'm just adding a little bit more, and for sure this is pretty different. I kind of thought these might be similar. I don't know why. Purely because Isom has sold Viseart, but this feels different. Blending super, super nicely. Okay, so onto the shimmer shade. I think I'm going to go in with this one. Honestly, these don't have names on the back of them, which is pretty disappointing. I'm going to be using the shade right here, and I will put it up on the screen once I look up which shade that is. I did press this one down with a little bit of tissue paper because it was a very, 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 very emollient, and but like in a squishy way almost. Not necessarily squishy, more kind of like literally buttery, but not buttery in a good way. So I was like, this is not going to wear well on me, and lo and behold, it did not wear really well on me. So I'm just going to be using this for like a really fiery look. And then I'm going to be taking the shade next to it. It's essentially an iridescent. This one has a little bit more base to it, but this one is like a true iridescent. And I honestly feel like a lot of these look very, very similar for a first launch. There's a tiny bit of a difference between these two. I don't know if I'm really... This one looks actually a little bit more fiery orange, where this looks like a lighter, almost goldish orange. Very, very interesting. I'm just gonna go in a little bit more just to layer that. And for the most part, they all feel pretty emollient. I think some of them are a little bit less than others. Dipping into this shade for the lower lash line. Here's the first finished look. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to prime with the Paint Louise? With the P. Louise paint primer. There we go. That's what I meant to say. And this brush needs to be washed. But just gonna be, I'm just gonna go in with my finger. For this look, I'm gonna go in with this shade. And I'm just gonna put that into the crease. Okay, definitely feel like I'm getting a bit more pigmentation off the bat than on the Pat McGrath primer. So it could be dependent, but still not quite the same as Viseart, which is what I'm going to be comparing it this whole time. And then I'm taking the white, and I'm just going to use that for the edges, especially in here. I feel like it was blending a little bit easier on the Pat McGrath, but obviously totally first impressions. So I think that's pretty good here. Wiped off as much as I could from this brush, and I'm going to go in with this dark plum. And that's nothing's coming off. That was interesting. Okay, still buildable. And just a little bit more. I'm just going to keep essentially building up in here. So I'm going to stamp it down first. That does not look as deep as it... That does not look the same. In the pan, it definitely seems like it will be darker. So I'm just going to keep packing on a bit more. And also bring it underneath my lower lash line. And just a little bit more. Oh my, I really feel like I have to almost dig in there. This one feels a little bit harder pressed. Maybe that's what it is. And then I'm just going to go back to this brush. And just take it to the outer corner. And I do really want to try out the black, so I think I'm going to go in with a much smaller brush. This is the Game Beauty EO5. And I'm dipping into the black, and we're gonna see how it layers. Ooh, so far, so good. I'm just gonna smoke it a little bit here. The tiniest. Just a tiny bit. And then a little bit underneath my lower lash line. And then I'm gonna go back with this brush. This is a Refer 14 Mini. And I'm just going to blend that in here. I'm gonna go back into the dark plum as well. I'm thinking this might be nice, but this might be nice, but I kind of wanted to use the green. Would that be weird? I think I'm gonna go in with this bluish shade, so whatever that name is. Picked it up on this Refer 21 brush, and I think I'm gonna mist it. Yeah, I'm gonna mist it with just some water. Usually that helps to spread. Oh my, so pretty. But we have definitely seen these at this point many times over, these kinds of black-based multichromes. This shade is also squishy, and then I feel like I want to blend the edges of that, so I'm just gonna go in with this brush. And then what do I want to make it real interesting? I kind of want to go in with the green. We're gonna go with the green. Just picked it up on this brush. Just picks up so nicely. These are all very smooth, absolutely zero flaky texture in these, which is nice. I feel like I would be curious to see this one applied with a pinky. I feel like it's kind of blending out a little bit. Definitely helps a little bit. Just gonna go back in some more, put it all on the lid. That blends so nicely into the blue. Here's the finished look. I have very mixed feelings on the formula. It reminds me very much of the Beaute and the Monochromance palette from Hindash, and if you watch any of my previous videos mentioning those palettes, you know I actually really enjoy those palettes because that is a very buildable formula, and I love a very buildable formula. I also love a very pigmented formula, so it really depends on kind of my mood. And the way that these perform is definitely very much a buildable formula, so if you love mattes that are buildable, I think you will really enjoy this palette, and I think it makes a lot of sense for a makeup artist formula to be buildable. So in terms of Viseart versus this formula, Viseart is very pigmented right off the bat. This one, you kind of have to keep dipping back in essentially, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's really not much kick up. Viseart has a bit more kick up. These are harder pressed even just from swatching, and I actually feel like these might be a little bit prone to hard panning if you go in and you're really trying to use your fingers and swatch them. So I think it's a good formula, but it will very much depend on what you like in a matte eyeshadow formula. Personally, I do prefer the Viseart formula. I just think it's a little bit more closer in to how I like to apply my eyeshadow, how I'm used to applying eyeshadow with the brushes that I use. So I do prefer that one. This one, just not my favorite. I don't think I would purchase another palette from them, honestly. So as much as I appreciate a buildable formula, I already kind of have that with the Hindash palettes, and there's a little bit more variety in those because the Monochromance palette has some pinks and purples and blue as well, while this one is just a very neutral palette. But again, I think this is a great everyday palette to reach for, but not my absolute favorite, and I'm glad that I tried it, but I feel like I'm all set with this. So onto the Queen Cosmetics Multichromes. I think that the fact that you have to buy both of these things separately, I mean, it makes sense, but I think it just makes it very expensive, and I'm not really sure how many people will want to spend $10 on this on a single eyeshadow. I think this is definitely aimed towards very particular people and how they like to use eyeshadows. I think especially the iridescent shades are great for one and done shadows. So if that's something you really want and you want it in a nice cute little compact, then that is for you for sure. I do hope that they come out with like an empty palette where you can just put a bunch of these shades in there. So let's talk about the formula of these. They're definitely more on the almost kind of like slick, wet feeling, a little bit squishy side. So if you have hooded, oily lids, these will probably crease on you because these do crease on me within 30 minutes, sometimes maybe an hour. And use a tissue to press down on them and try to get some of the whatever is causing it to be a little bit on the wet side out so that I could get better wear time. So I do have a much better experience with them now. That being said, not really ideal. And they do say, I think they have a claim on there that they're crease proof or that they're budge proof, but they definitely aren't. They're very slick formula. It doesn't set down like a cream shadow or a gel shadow or something like that. It never sets down, no matter if I use some sort of a tacky primer or anything like that. In terms of colors, I mean, I think you could see from my swatch comparisons that most of these shades are not very unique. We've definitely seen these shades over and over again, particularly the black-based multichromes. I think if anything, this shade is kind of like the most interesting shade out of all of these, but I definitely have some very, very similar shades, and I do definitely prefer these kinds of shades. So in terms of my absolute favorite shades, if you wanted to get one or two of the shades, I would recommend this one right here, which is like a very beautiful silvery topper-like shade. And oh, I forgot to mention, these do not have names on the back of them, which is really frustrating, and it's been really hard to honestly label these because a lot of them are very similar. They have a very similar type of shift, so they shift a gold, peachy yellow, and I wish they had come out with a bit more of a variety for this launch, as this is their first time launching these single shadows. These two shades are very similar. I do prefer this one that has just a little bit more of a little less iridescent look to it. So I think these three shades are my favorite. I have worn this one to the gym now that I have used the tissue, and it lasted really well on top of a tacky primer throughout all the sweating. So it's just a really nice, fun, one and done kind of shadow, which I think most of these are, but you can of course also layer them over different colorful mattes and create like a whole different kind of look, which is why I do prefer those over the black-based multichromes. I've had these for a few months, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea on how I feel about them. So let me know in the comments below if you plan on picking any of these up, or if you already have, let me know your thoughts on them. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.